election rally last week in the Caribbean country of Guyana. These black Guyanese are supporters of the man elected Prime Minister 5 years ago, Mr. Forbes Burnham. World in Action shouldn't really have been here at Mr. Burnham's rally because he banned us after Guyana's last elections in 1968. We upset the Prime Minister then by pointing out that he owed his narrow victory to an unconventional election tactic. Just enough votes were faked to let him win. Last week, despite Mr. Burnham's ban, we did go back to Guyana, discreetly camouflaged as an American film unit. We went to watch the making of a Prime Minister and to see if Mr. Burnham does it again.
I've got on my list Barbara Curtis, who gives this address as her address.
Never heard of a woman of that name.
How long have you been here?
About 15 years.
Anyone live upstairs?
No, nobody.
In this World in Action film, made in 1968, we annoyed Mr. Burnham by checking on the 40,000 Guyanese voters he claimed were living overseas in England. The film showed that the vast majority of these Guyanese, supposedly alive and well in the back streets of Britain, just didn't exist. They'd been invented. Despite our report, these invisible voters later appeared in the ballot boxes of Guyana in large enough numbers to give the Prime Minister a working majority.
Come in front, comrades, come in front, come in front. Come on, comrades, come on, come on. So that the leader can see those faces, those happy faces, those PNC faces.
Last week, Mr. Burnham went to the polls again. Since 1968, Forbes Burnham has become a considerable statesman among leaders of the Third World, who recently conferred in Guyana. He talks the language of black power.
Let me hear you give a cheer for the comrade leader as he comes on. Louder than that, comrades, louder!
Though helped to power by America's CIA, Mr. Burnham has recently taken a sharp left turn to establish links with Russia, Cuba and China and nationalize some foreign-owned industry. But unfortunately for the Prime Minister, this international success has not removed his problem of winning votes in Guyana.
It is not for me to tell you in which direction a bright future lies. It would be, on my part, an imposition on your intelligence to tell you which of the political parties can offer you the future which you want and the future which you deserve. Tomorrow, I ask you to make your decision. Make it conscious of the fact that not merely does your future depend upon that decision, but the future of your children, the future of generations yet unborn.
Mr. Burnham's problem is that he's black, and so are most of his party. Unfortunately for these descendants of African slaves imported by the British, they're outnumbered by the brown descendants of Indian laborers, also imported by the British to this small South American country. Guyana is isolated between Venezuela and Brazil on the northwest corner of the continent. The Indians, opposed to Burnham, have just over half the population, and they're increasing faster than the Africans. The black Guyanese make up some 30% of the country and provide Mr. Burnham's electoral base. The rest are of mixed or European descent or belong to the original Amerindian tribes of the interior. Burnham's main opponent is Cheddi Jagan, the man who first led the Guyanese in opposition to British colonial rule. He's still the Marxist hero of Guyana's biggest racial group, the Indians. Jagan was Prime Minister between 1953 and 1964. In a straight election, many think he would be again.
All over the country, where we go, from one end of the country to the other, it's the same old story. Thousands and thousands of people are coming out now, in fact tens of thousands. People are fed up with the PNC. 8 years of suffering, they have decided to bring it to an end, and on Monday we see a victory for the People's Party.
Jagan fears that in this election, Burnham is trying for a two-thirds majority, which would give him the power to create a one-party state, and that he'll use the same methods as last time to achieve it.
Well, this election, there are so many ways in which the elections are being rigged. Number one, the voters' lists are padded. For instance, from 68 to now, the voters' lists have increased by 24%. This is impossible because the net increase per year in the population is 2.5%.
The problem for Mr. Burnham and his supporters is simple: how to keep power in a country where the racial majority is Indian. And this time the Prime Minister is aiming for something more ambitious than a simple victory. This time he wants a two-thirds majority, enough to change the country's constitution. But before this election, he promised that the irregularities of 1968 would not occur again.
Well, the irregularities which we noted were primarily an excessive number of registration of Guyanese overseas. And what is noteworthy, that of the number supposedly registered in 1968, slightly over only 50% voted, as against a poll here of over 90%. And it was because of the precautions we took that the poll overseas was relatively so low. The re-preparation of the lists, I think, this time will avoid that.
To check on Mr. Burnham's change of heart, World in Action got possession of the new lists of Guyanese registered to vote and said to be living in England. These were compiled about 6 months ago. The first signs were promising. The number of Guyanese said to be in Britain had been reduced from 40,000 last time to 18,000, a total just about in line with the recent British census. Perhaps this time Mr. Burnham was playing it straight. But our first experiences in London raised some doubts.
Do you live next door to this house they're pulling down?
That's correct. I live in here.
I'm looking for Mr. Eric Nightingale. Did he ever live there?
No, not 15 years. I've been living here 15 years.
Does Peggy Bennett live here?
No.
Has she ever lived here?
Not that I know of, no.
No, not to my knowledge. Well, not in this particular part of the street.
Not since 1935, anyway.
Can you tell me, does Maurice Phillips live here?
No.
Or Oliver Phillips?
No.
Or Pauline Phillips?
No.
Or Robert Phillips?
Never heard of him.
Excuse me, we're looking at 23 Road Street.
Well, it was here about 2 years back, but the road's been cut off with corrugated iron, and it's just erected new flats.
How long ago was that?
About 2 years.
From the official lists, we took 550 names and addresses of voters in London, Birmingham and Manchester. First we checked 350 in London. We found that less than a third were genuine. Sunwell Street in Peckham has been closed off for a year and the houses demolished. And here, where number 2 used to be, Nurse Joyce Duncan is still supposed to live and vote. Many of the London addresses were being converted by building firms. At 8 Balham Park Road, Horace Lynch was listed.
This was 8 Balham Park Road.
Yes, Governor, I shall carry on working. This was 8 or 9, 10 Balham Road,
I see. When was it vacated? When people last lived here?
say. Over a year ago.
It was well over a year ago.
Definitely.
Oh, I see. Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Oh, well, you're not going away just yet. What's your telephone number?
Out of every 10 names on the overseas list in London, 3 proved to be genuine, a bit more than last time. So to underpin our London survey, we checked another 200 names in Birmingham and Manchester. And it was in Birmingham that we got conclusive proof that Mr. Burnham's men were at it again. Only 2% of the addresses sampled were found to be genuine. Any thought that Mr. Burnham might have employed more subtle methods this time was soon dispelled.
Is this 104 Antrobus Road?
Yeah.
Does a Mr. Geoffrey Baker live here?
No, I've never heard of him.
So there's nobody called Price here at the moment?
No.
From Guyana?
No.
Birmingham had its own special fraud. 29% of the streets and houses named did not exist at all. Here in demolished Camden Street, where John Hales is listed, we found a burst water main and a factory. In Manchester, we got a sense of how one overseas vote fiddle was done. Many of the people on Mr. Burnham's lists here did exist. The only problem was that they were Jamaicans, not Guyanese. However, some of Mr. Burnham's fixers at least have a sense of humour. We went looking for Raymond Gray, listed as a fitter, and Beverly Lawrence, a clerk.
Mrs. Gray, this is 356 William Kent Crescent in New York.
Yeah.
Can you tell me where you're from?
I'm from Jamaica.
Do you know how you got onto the Guyana voting list? Because
No.
we have your name here, you see.
No, I don't know.
No. Now, Stanley Gray, according to this, is a farmer. Is that right? Is he still a farmer?
Oh, well, he couldn't do farming here now. He's working in a factory.
Can you tell me about Raymond Gray? He's described as a fitter. Do you know how old is
All
he?
I know about Raymond, he's only 6-year-old.
And it's just that's Raymond there, yeah?
Yeah, this is Raymond.
So you don't know how he got on the list at all?
No.
And he hasn't voted in the election?
Oh, can he vote? Could he vote? He's too small to vote anyway. He's only 6.
Is that Beverly?
Yeah, she's Beverly.
That's Beverly Lawrence?
Yeah.
How old is she?
She's 7 months.
7 months?
Yeah.
Did you know she's down on the Guyanese election list?
No.
She's actually down here with a vote to vote in Guyana. She's a separate.
No, I didn't know.
Do you know how else you could have got on the list?
I don't know, no idea at all.
Are you from Guyana?
No, Jamaica.
The fixers were also ingenious. Jamaicans in Manchester told us that 2 months ago they'd been offered free land in Guyana, but those who applied had to fill in forms, giving their addresses and the names of wives and all children. Suddenly, all these Jamaican names turned up on the overseas voting list for Guyana. One Jamaican joined in the spirit of the thing and actually voted. Fred Finlayson.
How many people voted from this house?
3.
3? There are 8 down here. There are 8 people living here.
8 with kids, yes.
Oh, 8 with kids? Yes. So some of your children might be on this list?
Yes.
But you only had 3 votes?
Yes.
Why did you vote in the Guyana elections?
Well, I expect to go there, you know.
You expect to go to Guyana?
Yeah.
But you are a Jamaican?
Yes.
You think that's okay to vote in the Guyana elections?
Makes no difference.
But what difference does it make? In 1968, the fake overseas vote gave Mr. Burnham a working majority. This time, there were 33,000 overseas voters. In Canada, there were 3,000 Guyanese registered to vote. Next was the United States, which had 7,000 on the list. But the biggest single group was in Britain, which had 18,000 people registered. Being extremely generous, we accepted that a third of these were genuine. Though unlikely, this would make a maximum of 6,000 bona fide voters here. But that still means that up to 12,000 votes had been invented in Britain for this election. A spot check in America suggested a similar pattern over there. Just off Trafalgar Square in London is the office of the Guyana High Commission. The chief election officer for the overseas vote in Britain is Guyana's High Commissioner, Sir John Carter. He personally took the votes cast back to Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, before the election. Having established that many voters in Britain did not exist, we now wanted to see if Mr. Burnham would get that 2/3 majority. So we went back to Guyana to see what happened. To get round the ban on World in Action, we sent an American colleague in from New York with an American film unit to cover the election campaign.
Voting is simple. All you are required to do is to put an X opposite the list of candidates of the party of your choice. Voting is secret. When the presiding officer has given you a ballot paper, go into the polling compartment and mark your ballot. Before you put the ballot paper into the ballot box, your finger will be stained with electoral ink. Having done this, you are to leave the polling place quickly and quietly.
When the polls opened early last Monday, the opposition leader, Cherry Jagan, toured the Indian areas where his support was strong. It soon became clear that things were not going smoothly.
So they didn't give you a paper to vote?
No, they don't give me. When they make me swear everything. When I don't swear, they ask that one, ask that one. They say, we can't give me a ballot paper. Michelle give me, we can't. He said, no. They go put it right and post it with me. We don't want that. It's damn nonsense.
Oh, well, anyway, we can see just now why.
We're waiting for some government name in the list.
And he has no, what else happening here?
Down at the polling station at the new road there. They have 3 comrades there that they fell by the women by name of Ruby something vote for 3 people there. I can't remember the title.
Isn't it that only 2 people can vote for 2 proxies you can cast?
Among the crowds in the first district was one Indian who listed his complaints for us.
From industry to Montrose, there are approximately 370 persons voted by postal voting. And in it I have seen quite a number of people who was already dead. For instance, Benjamin Kunar, a doctor, has died over 2 years now. Lamy Bacchus, an old chauffeur, has died over a year now. Bakshali has died over 2 years. Mr. and Mrs. Archer has died over a year now. Allen has died about 2 months now.
There are dead people, there are underage people, there are names of people who do not exist on the voters list. We have tremendous support in these areas, but this is a means of disenfranchising our supporters. You have to tell our chap in there to tell the officer that they must do the staining after the man goes.
The police officer do not allow nobody to go up.
They don't want to hear
They even give me a rough time if you want to go offer these people some things to eat.
No, this is the situation. This lady is a voter. She voted last election. Now her name is not on the voters list.
Was it on the list before? First list?
Yes.
Yes.
It was in the first list that came out first for this election?
Yes.
Your name was there?
Yes.
And now your name not there?
Yes.
All right, that's one case. Okay, very good.
It wasn't just Jagan's party that complained of fraud. Dr. G. Kumar is the leader of the Conservative Liberator Party.
Well, the main thing, the theme running through the entire election procedure really is one of fraud. This has occurred at various levels. There were people who were dead who voted. There were people who went to vote who had never signed any proxy forms, who had never signed any postal vote forms. And yet when they turned up to vote, they were told that they had already voted by post. When these people would complain, some of them were just sent off. Some of them were allowed to sign a tendered ballot. A tendered ballot is a colored paper which they would sign. It's mainly to give satisfaction to the voter because it's not counted at the end of the day.
And Mr. Burnham's former Minister of Home Affairs, Llewellyn John, leading another small Conservative party, was also worried.
Well, to some extent, fraud is not necessarily fraud, but it can lead to fraud. In other words, as I said, any system of elections is subject to manipulation, fraudulent manipulation. And if you have the methods which are so weak, particularly when you control the election machine, it will naturally lead to some measure of fraud.
The ultimate insult for Mr. John was the appearance of his own parents as postal voters. They both died 2 years ago. As election day wore on, the opposition offices were swamped by people complaining of being cheated.
All around they're watching me, the constable and the other girls, and all of them see what happened.
He didn't tell you why he's putting it?
No, he didn't tell me
any explanation. No. When you came in, they called your name?
Yes,
they called your number?
Yes, I.
You showed your
identification
card?
Yes.
And so you weren't allowed to vote then?
Yes, I vote.
But your vote isn't put in the regular ballot box?
That's right.
And they mark your finger?
Yes.
They mark your finger?
Yes.
That you voted?
Yes.
But your vote doesn't go in the regular box, and you were given no explanation whatsoever?
They didn't want to hear. They showed me the way to walk out.
And they said they voted already.
They said you voted already?
Yes.
By proxy? They told you how?
They said they voted already and they never...
For an underdeveloped country, a remarkable number of Guyanese, 93%, can read and write. The interest in politics is also intense, and the right to vote, so long demanded before independence, seems highly valued.
Yeah, they said that I voted already.
And you did not vote already?
No, I never voted yet. They didn't sign the paper.
And as soon as I enter, the young lady that is there asked me my name, and I told her when she do, she find it in the list. She said, you cannot vote now no more because you vote by postage. I said, what? Postage by what I now cross? And they tell me that I vote as postage. The sergeant has some paper in his hand. He said, this is only police paper. And after he told me that I got to turn away, they have the inspector sit down side of him. He called me twice, and I said, what you call me for? He said, come and tell me who you're voting for. I came back 2 steps, and I did not afraid to tell him, Frank, I'm voting for Teddy. Then he called me, and I walked right out. I said, no time for you, and I walked right out, and I fetch a car, and I come at the Freedom House.
You voted?
I voted.
You went to vote?
Yes, and
this is your ID card. You went to vote, and they said someone had voted for you at 6:30 a.m. You have a march on what street? Huh?
Wellington Street.
Wellington Street. Why don't you get your ID card, too? Get your ID. You didn't sign any paper?
No.
You didn't sign proxy?
No.
You didn't sign postal vote? No. You didn't sign any paper? How many times you voted before in the other elections? You voted in many. I know you from years. You vote here, 1968?
I vote in a street called Main Street when I used to live in New Market Street. I always vote.
Yeah, but in the last elections you voted the same place, and this time you were refused to vote. They refused to allow you.
You can't come and tell me somebody vote for me.
What happened when you went there?
I went there, and the fellow asked me if my name is Walter Upton. I said yes. I told him my name before. He said, you already voted. I say, I never voted as yet. Look at my fingers. He gave me a Bible, and I take a swear. He said, okay then, give me a tendered ballot to vote on. I say, I want to refuse to do that, and I leave.
Do you know if other people have suffered the same fate?
There are 13 more which I meet outside, and they have said to me the same thing was to happen to me, happened to them.
What happened, sir, myself and wife went to vote. And when I go, my wife vote. And my wife and me, I married my wife 14 years, up to now we live together. Nobody come to me, no, I signed no paper from the last vote. When I go, they say, somebody vote for your proxy vote. I say, how that can be?
In other words, they claim that somebody voted for you.
How it can be, sir?
Yeah.
You can pay my debt. You must son. You can pay my debt. I hope. How that can be unfair? I say it's unfair.
So they would not let you vote?
No. I have my card with me. Everything checked. Nobody says somebody vote proxy vote. How proxy? I'm not blind. I can read and write. I ride on bicycle. I have a bicycle downstairs.
Did you ask at any point for a proxy for someone else to deliver your vote?
They said you can't vote.
They said you cannot vote, and they said that somebody has voted for you.
Yes, sir. That is unfair, sir. I can't take it so.
From people in other parties, even Burnham's own PNC, we collected sworn statements about how they lost their votes, like top sports broadcaster Ian Haynes.
I was told by the polling officer that I had already voted. But I told him this was impossible, so he advised me to check with the returning officer for that station, who told me I had already voted by proxy. I also found out, from looking through the list, that my sister, who is in America right now, and has been for the last 5 years, my mother, who's there for the last 5 weeks, and my father, who's alive, and I left him at home, we had all voted already.
But if a postal vote, if a vote was cast in my name, and I didn't vote, something is wrong somewhere. So somebody got to be lying.
And he stopped the line from voting and explained to me properly that you mightn't be a postal voter, but you is a registered dead voter.
He said that you were dead.
That night, when the polls closed, the government lorries carrying disputed ballot boxes into the capital ran into trouble. The opposition had been promised that their agents would be allowed to travel with the boxes, but on election night this promise was broken, and Indians clashed with Burnham's black soldiers escorting the boxes. In one district, 2 Indians were shot dead.
Boxes from 3 or 4 miles away from Georgetown did not reach the counting area at 9 o'clock this morning, and polling finished at 6 o'clock yesterday. So we have grave fears that there will be many irregularities, and that the reason why these boxes have not reached is because they're being tampered with.
As the results were declared in the government press room, Burnham's series of resounding victories in Indian strongholds now caused remarkably little surprise. The waiting pressmen preferred to play cards. Burnham won 37 seats, Jagan won only 14, and Kumar got 2. So the Prime Minister gained his 2/3 majority by just 2 seats. The invisible voters of England had helped him home again. Altogether, 29,000 overseas votes were cast. Even allowing for the unlikely assumption that all 15,000 in the rest of the world were genuine, 14,000 votes must still have come from Britain. Again, being extremely generous, only 6,000 here could possibly be genuine. So 8,000 votes in Britain were bogus. The remainder of the 29,000 cast are just as dubious. Not surprisingly, 98% of the overseas votes went to Mr. Burnham, who got his 2/3 majority with the unwitting help of Raymond, the 6-year-old fitter of Manchester, and Beverley, the baby office clerk, both caught up in the politics of a faraway country where the opposition now fears for the future.
People are willing to go and vote because they realize that their entire future hangs on this question of election. We are a peaceful people. We are not thinking of violent revolution. But the people have become very frustrated, very disillusioned, very disenchanted by what has been happening over the past several years.
We feel that it is necessary for the people to understand clearly, step by step, it's a part of their political education, that they must understand. Either they force the government to have free and fair elections by mass action, or we have to find some other means to get into power. The people must be able to see that the electoral road is completely closed to them, and other means have to be used.
So far as the one-party state is concerned, I've over and over again said that Guyana's tradition is contrary to the establishment of any one-party state. And secondly, I myself am against the one-party state. With whom do you debate? Against whom do you test your policies and your programs if you have a docile one-party state? It may work well in other countries and in other states, but certainly, in my opinion, it will not work well or at all in Guyana.
So Mr. Burnham, despite his promise of a fair election, seems to have done it again, with the result that the opposition has today withdrawn from the new parliament. And should Mr. Burnham change his mind about a one-party state, his supporters will at least be spared the charade of populating the back streets of Britain with invisible Guyanese in 1978.